Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Alissa. As we enter into our series on special needs planning, our first topic is transitioning from childhood to adulthood. So today to talk about that, I will be interviewing Elizabeth Adams. She's the VP of Adult Services at Pathways of Southwestern Pennsylvania. How are you today, Elizabeth?
I'm good. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for joining me to talk about this.
Absolutely.
So to start out, can you just provide a high-level overview of what transition planning means for individuals with special needs as they move from childhood into adulthood, and what the biggest differences are between the school-based services and adult service systems?
Yes. So transition planning is really essential. The systems are very different, and that's what I would say is the biggest thing for that transition planning, is because when you're in the school system, you fall under the IDEA. With that, that means that you're entitled to services, right? The school is responsible for identifying any students that may have a disability. They are responsible for identifying that. They are responsible for helping those, kiddos. They're responsible for making that education program around that. Where the big difference is when you move to adult services, you're no longer entitled, you then become eligible, and it falls on the individual and or the family members to seek it out.
And important to remember too that children or young adults can stay in the school system. It's until, what's the date of their birthday, their 22nd birthday?
It is the day before they turn 22. So it doesn't matter if a student, you don't have to end a school year at the end of the school year, right? So if you are in a school setting and you have the ability to go up until the day before your 22nd birthday, regardless if it's the end of the school year or in the middle of the school year.
Yes. So from a planning perspective, when should families start planning for adult services in this transition?
So underneath the IEP, that's the plan that the school systems use, the individualized education plan. They have to start transitioning, or they have to start talking about the transition at the age of 14. Being from adult services, it's very important to do that and to really start to get an idea of what that looks like and what, because every student that receives special, every student that has an IEP, it ranges vastly, right? So you have some students that they're not going to need any real supports after they graduate, where others are going to need 24-hour care, right? So there is such a wide variety. And so knowing the needs of the student, I would suggest that, starting at 14, but really, because once you go into adult services, it is very much the family and the individual's responsibility. So it's important to get as much information as you possibly can about what that looks like outside of the school districts.
So once they turn 18 or, almost turning 22 and their eligibility for services change, what else changes, right? Can they start to transition into those programs that you're mentioning beforehand, or is it kind of a hard stop from school and then they start these adult services programs?
Well, it's really contingent on the family, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, adult services, you are not automatically guaranteed that. The family has to apply, and we'll get more into it. We call it, in the state of Pennsylvania, I should say, they call it waivers. Mm-hmm. And so you have to apply for this waiver. And so that can take a very long time. So I always recommend families at the age of 14 to really start to understand what the waiver system is and how that works, and to kind of get it, scoped out. So that way, you want to be applying, you want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row prior, at least a year prior to that, your student graduating. regardless if it's at 18 or 21, that you have that set up, because if you don't, there's going to be a gap in services. So they're going to end school and they're not going to be eligible to do anything in adult services until they get, a waiver of some sort.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Medicaid waivers. If you could help us understand what services they cover and why they're so critical in special needs planning.
Yes. So waivers are, so first, let me just explain what a waiver is. So a lot of times, you'll go, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, you'll see HCBS, which stands for Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. And that is a Medicaid funded waiver. It supports individuals within their home and within the community. It helps avoid institutional placements, right? Like back in the day, we used to have institutions, and we don't do that anymore. And then it funds adult disability services, which is all under. So the HCBS waivers that are very traditional to a lot of students' needs is run under the Office of Developmental Programs, which also known as ODP. However, that being said, all waivers are not created equal. There's actually 12 different waivers that somebody can apply for in the state of Pennsylvania, and only 3 of them are under that home and community-based services. And so that's, again, just gaining the knowledge and really finding out what the different waivers are, because they're not all created equal. And to go into each of them, that's where you have to do your research, right? Mm-hmm. So you have under the HB or the home and community-based services, that's where you have your your group home living. So if you would need to, if somebody chooses to live, in their own place, so they would live, either move into a group home or they would do a supported living situation, depending on their needs. And then that's where, you can do in-home and community-based services. We have a self-directed service. It's called Agency with Choice. There's lots of options, right? There's behavior supports, employment services, day programs. So at Pathways, we have our ATF program, which we work on, skills, and then take that into the community and build on those community-based skills. Those are all services that are funded through the home and community-based waivers. However, if your child or student has more of a medical, they're highly medical, they have a lot of medical things going on with them, that might not be the best waiver for them. There's a CHC waiver that is more medically based, and it is funded through managed care. So it's funded through insurance, right? Insurance companies fund that one. So, it really is important for families to really look at the needs of their, of their individual, of their family member, and really go through the different waivers that are available so that they're educated on which one would best fit the needs of that, their family member.
That's great. And do they vary state by state, or is it pretty consistent?
So I'm not an expert on the different states, but they do vary state by state. So each state has their own guidelines that they put into place that follow the federal guidelines. So every state is slightly different, and even in what they call them. But my recommendation would be that if you were planning on going to another state, or if you lived in another state, is to just really look at what their system is and how it's broken down, and what waiver, what each waiver provides, right? Because again, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, not all waivers are created equal.
And you mentioned before how sometimes, if you don't plan in a timely manner, there can be gaps, right, in your funding. So what is a typical wait list, and, how could families plan around that?
So there is a thing, so Pennsylvania uses a thing specifically with the home and community-based service waivers. And that is what we work with the most, because you have to have one of those three waivers to receive services through pathways, right? Through our ATF program, our self-directed agency with choice program, our residential program. So I'm going to talk more specifically about those. And it is the three that those are is PFDS waiver, community living waiver, and then consolidated waiver. And what those three are is that your PFDS waiver has a cap. It has a monetary cap where you cannot spend, you know what I mean, that it will cover whatever services that fit underneath of that description up to $46,000. And then community living waiver, the same thing. You can use those the waiver. Your cap though is $90,000. And then some people call consolidated waiver the golden ticket because there is no cap. So it will provide any services you need. And the way that they kind of look at the wait list, there is a waiting list, and there's a waiting list for all three. Now, grant you, the waiting list for consolidated is a lot higher because there's only so many slots, like consolidated waiver slots. So you have to wait until one becomes available and things like that. But what they do for the wait list is it's PUNS, and it's really a needs. So it's an assessment that a supports coordinator does with that individual or your family member, and it assesses the needs of that individual. So it'll talk about, all of the stuff. So is there medical issues? Is there behavior issues? Their cognitive ability? What type of supports do they need? Do they need like 24-hour supports? Do they only need, It really goes into depth, and that will give you, your kind of like rating, so to speak. And that will help to put you on that wait list, right? So if you have a high PUNS level or a high PUNS need, you then would kind of get bumped up, right? And also things that go into that is like, there's some times where someone might be homeless, right? So they're going to bump up a little bit on that PUNS because, they may be in a critical state. So that's really the biggest piece for the wait list is those PUNS. And PUNS can change, right? I could lose my apartment tomorrow, right? And then become homeless, where then at that point, my needs level has changed. So I may, jump up on the list for whatever waiver. So your PFDS waiver, the wait list is not as long. That's usually kind of like your entry waiver to the home and community-based services. And then, as your needs change, then you go into a community living waiver. There's more community living waiver slots than there are, consolidated. So it's really just, working closely with your team and making sure that your PUNS are updated and, that your needs are being expressed to bypass some of those long waits for the wait list.
So how do programs like SSI integrate with Medicaid eligibility and services?
You can have one or the other, or you can have both. So if you have a child or a family member that has, a disability and that qualifies for Social Security, you can apply for Social Security when they're babies, right? Like you can do, there's no age limit, there's no restriction. As long as you qualify, you can start getting that. For adult services, it's essential that, if the sorry about that. Okay. If the individual or the child or the family member, again, looking at their needs, if they're not going to be able to maintain a job and to be able to pay their bills and all of this stuff, then I would highly suggest, getting Social Security prior to them, graduating, or as early as you need to or want to, right? But having that Social Security is going to help benefit them when they go into adult services, because that's going to be their source of income, right? Mm-hmm. With, it doesn't really affect it with like the Medicaid waivers. It will assist a little bit because if you are qualified for Social Security disability, then a lot of that same information is going to be used to qualify you for the Medicaid waiver, right? So it does go hand in hand, but you don't have to, you don't have to have Social Security to be, eligible for the Medicaid waiver, and this vice versa, right? You could get Social Security without, getting eligible for the Medicaid waivers.
What role do vocational rehabilitation and employment programs play in funding support?
So with vocational rehab, in employment programs, it's really big. Like, I think that these are fantastic for all of our individuals, regardless of what their abilities are, because, just like everybody else, working and earning money gives you dignity, and it makes you feel in control, right? So we want that for all of our individuals. And so the state of Pennsylvania also notices that as well. So there is a huge push right now for having the voc rehabs and having employment services be really pushed into the school settings and really into the adult services world. Now, again, going back on the waivers, if that is something that your child or your student or your family member is interested in, or you feel like that is something that's important to them, please make sure you look at those waivers to see which waivers has employment services underneath of them, right? And then once you get into that, there is a process where you have to go through OVR and either, get rejected or, do OVR, do your employment through OVR. But there's tons of programs out there, like providers that provide employment services as well. So, there's lots of ability and flexibility for, our individuals and individuals and students.
So the adult service system is very complex. Obviously, you've been around a lot of acronyms and, lots of different waivers, everything. So the last handful of questions I have are really around just like helping families prepare and make sure they have the right people in place, on their team and documentation and everything. So first, what are the key steps that they should follow to navigate the system effectively?
So you have to start, in your IEP meeting, they will start talking about it when your child or student turns 14 years old, right? That's a law, it's in there. My recommendation for family members is to really start researching at that point. And you can start researching well before they turn 14, but that's where the discussion starts, right? And it's put into their IEP plan. It is essential for them to look into it because it is so complex. And the biggest thing is that they're no longer entitled to it, right? In school, you're entitled to everything. In adult services, you are no longer entitled, you are then eligible. And that is really the biggest difference, so everything falls back on that family member, on that individual to make it happen. It's not going to happen unless you drive that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really important to do your research, find out, based on the needs and the abilities of your family member, that what waiver makes most sense, right? And then figure out where you want to go from there. And then that's when you can go and you can start to apply. Like I said, you don't have to wait until you're 22, 21. You can apply for waiver services, at the age of 14. Now, you may not be eligible at that point because you're receiving all of your services through the school. But again, getting used to, the intake process and all of the documentation, having all of that ready and understand the process is really going to be essential.
And what critical professionals or organizations should families engage during the transition?
So, of course, your team at, within the school. So your special ed director or your, I know they're called different things at different school districts, but so your, whoever your coordinator is of your special ed services that you receive within the school district, you're going to have a very good relationship with them. but also went into the adult services, it really is essential that whatever county you live in, because the waiver also goes off of your county. So whatever county you reside in, that's where you're going to go to that county's, they're called slightly different things, but your human services, so it would be your, adult, not adult, I apologize about that. So like your disability services, you're going to go through your county. So if you live in Washington County, you're going to go through that system, and you're going to go, you can look it up their website. Here at Pathways, we have lots of information for like the different counties that we provide services to, their information for the intakes. That would be your first step, right? Your first step is to reach out to your county for their intake process and to get, start to build that relationship. And then from there, that's when you would start to look at, maybe some providers and things like that, of like services that you're interested in the after, graduation from school.
And is there certain documentation or evaluations that families should prepare in advance?
So there's no, trust me, they're going to let you know what you need in the intake process. But you're going to need information for the disability, right? So you're going to need to have that, from a doctor that, yes, Elizabeth was diagnosed with IDD, and you know what I mean? So like that documentation. And like I said, it's a little bit of a long process, right? And there's lots of supporting documentation that they're going to require. So that's, again, why it's so essential to really do it early.
And then, as families are thinking about how they want to handle like guardianship versus supported decision making, I mean, that's such an important decision, totally, based on the person too, and their needs and what they're capable of and who's in their life. But, how should they approach that decision?
I really think that the guardianship and supported decision making really should be a conversation with the individual and what their abilities are. And because, again, we just talked a little bit about dignity and respect, and taking someone's voice away from them is not always, the best thing. And I totally get it, right? Because you want to protect them, you want to keep them safe, and you want to shelter them. But I really think that, really having a conversation and like, what supports could you put into place to help protect them without taking guardianship, right? But again, that really is going to lie on a case-by-case basis, because there are some, people that feel one way, there are some people that feel another way. And really at the end of the day, it's all about, your individual and what they want and what they need.
So if someone's watching this video and they feel like, oh my goodness, I did not start early enough, there's so much to do, they're kind of later in the game, what are the most urgent steps that they should take?
Reaching out to your county administrator's office, right? So your county AE, figure out what that intake process is, get that started as quickly as possible, right? That would be my number one step, because first you have to get qualified for that waiver. But I guess thinking about that, I answered that question a little bit too quickly. I think the other piece of that, and this could be concurrently as well, but really look at the waivers, right? Because they're not all created equal. So making sure that you pick the waiver that's best going to support, your child, or if you yourself as an individual is doing this, that, they pick the one that's going to make the most sense for them.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us here. And to our audience, thank you for watching. We'll see you next month on another episode of Coffee with Alissa.
Absolutely. Thank you.